Blog Talk Radio.
Transition, the process of change from one condition to another.
We are now at a new crossroads where change is evident once again.
What does not serve us must transform us anew.
Returning to our original state of oneness and true nature of that which created who we truly are.
Confusion was the way of the past. Enlightenment is the way of the now and future. Shedding the layers of deceit.
We now bring you the transformation of the two who started as one. Our fearless planet never stands still.
Earth has been in a process of transition. Not exactly. It's remarkable, ongoing reality.
Welcome to Transition Radio.
Everyone, my name's Mark Angelo Cummings, your host.
And my name is Lena Ariel, your hostess.
We are broadcasting live from the beautiful land of enchantment, Silver City, New Mexico.
This time we wanted to take a moment to thank our sponsors, thebreastformstore.com. They have everything you can imagine to enhance your feminizing needs.
As well as Spunk Lube, which is an award-winning personal lubricant that's glycerin-free, non-staining, 100% sex toy safe with all materials, and it is fun to use.
Visit their website at spunklube.com to check out their amazing line of products.
Use the code TR and you will receive a 10% discount.
And if you enjoy our show, please tell your friends and neighbors. Share our website and donate if you can. Tonight we have Paula Nielsen, who is a true pioneer. Born Larry Nielsen in 1938, she transitioned identity on May 1st, 1963, and has lived as a trans woman ever since. Paula's autobiography is called The Trans Evangelist, The Life and Times of a Transgender Pentecostal Preacher.
Throughout the 1960s, Paula was a patient of Harry Benjamin, MD. Dr. Benjamin has been long recognized as an expert on sexuality and leader of transsexual treatment. In 1966, he authored The Transsexual Phenomenon. To avoid arrest, Paula carried a letter from Dr. Benjamin. During this decade, Paula sang in the choir, a tall girls trio and ladies choirette in a prominent four-square church where they knew nothing about her transsexuality.
She also worked for a leading theatrical agency as secretary to the controller. Throughout the 1990s, Sister Paula made guest appearances on national and international television programs. She was a featured guest on PM Magazine, Jenny Jones, Joan Rivers, The Daily Show, and Strange Universe.
She also appeared on The Shirley Show, a Canadian national talk show. The BBC featured Sister Paula on Saturday Night Live. And now, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our show, Sister Nielsen. Hello, Sister.
Good day. Hello, how are you?
We're doing great.
Nice to see you.
Yes, can you hear me all right?
Yes, I could hear you. Fantastic.
That's great.
Definitely.
Okay, well, just ask me whatever you want to know and I'll answer you.
Okay.
Wow. Okay, well, that's an open questionnaire, open statement. Number one, there has been many advances and changes since you transitioned in the 60s. Can you tell us information about what it was like? Oh, I'm sorry, we're like having a little problem with our poster. How it was like as a transgender female back then compared to now?
Well, trans people today, in a lot of ways, have it a lot easier than I had it when I first started out doing this when I was 25 years old in 1963. Back then, it was hardly even heard of. Now, Christine Jorgensen's story came out in 1952 when I was a freshman in high school, and that was the first time I was aware of the fact that I was, transsexual. Although the word transsexual was coined by Dr. Harry Benjamin in the 60s to describe describe someone whose physical, biological sex conflicts with their psychological sexual identity. But back in the 1963, when I did it, if you wanted to transition, we'll just use male to female, from male to female, and be totally accepted on a job in the straight cultures, you had to pass as a woman. Now, today, during our decade, people are transitioning, coming out to trans people are coming out to their employers on their jobs, working for big banks and insurance companies and things like that, and are transitioning while they're on the job. When I did this, that wouldn't happen. In fact, back then, people were arrested. A man impersonating a woman in public could be arrested. Now, that has changed since then by the Supreme Court rulings. But I carried around a letter from Dr. Harry Benjamin in case I ever was stopped by the police, although I never was. And, well, yes, I was too, but that's neither here nor there. There was nothing bad, came of it. But so anyway, if you wanted to live in the identity that you feel is your true psychological identity, you had to pass as a woman. I was in jobs back then in the 60s and the 70s in particular where they had no idea that I was trans. Had they had any idea, I would not have been working there. I would have lost my job. Or I know the Four Square Church I went to, Angelus Temple, certainly would not have had me singing in the ladies' choralette and a tall girls trio had they had any inkling that I was transgender back then. Now, today, moving forward all these years, that's changing. Now people are coming out. They're open about their transsexuality. And we have, back then, there was just basically two words, transvestite and transsexual. The word transgender was coined in the 1980, and now we have all kinds of new terminology in the trans community, cisgender and so on and so forth. But we've come a long way since I started doing this back in 1963, and I have documented all of this in my autobiography, which covers 7 decades, and I'm hoping that our upcoming generation of youth and trans, GLBT kids and all that will get encouragement from knowing what it was like back when we who pioneered all of this, what we went through, and I do rattle on, don't I? Let me stop right here and you go on.
No, that's just fine.
Let me ask you, though, how did you navigate the paperwork back in the day? Because I know today everything's about birth certificate and name change and all that red tape that we have to go through. How did you navigate that back in the day?
Well, I back then anybody you could fill out to get a Social Security card. You could you filled out a little card and sent it in. Now I understand to get a Social Security card and a Social Security number, you have to show a birth certificate, but you didn't back then. I just filled out the little card and sent it in, and then got my Social Security number under the name of Paula. And so I didn't come across the birth certificate problem when I got a driver's license as Paula. And I just went in with the ID that I had. They didn't require the birth certificate then. And I went in with the ID that I had then with the charge account or two and the Social Security number, and I got the license. Now it's a little bit different today. And I don't know that the people that are transitioning now, especially if they're transitioning and haven't had surgery, it's a little bit different now than it was back then. But I've had a driver's license that says F on it, which means I failed in sex. Which, female, on it for years and years. And they did start the thing not too long ago, a birth certificate being required to have a female on, your birth certificate changed, and they wouldn't change the birth certificate unless you'd had surgery. But I went to when it was time to renew my driver's license the last time, I just took a letter from my doctor, and they went ahead and just kept the female identity on it. And
now, are you originally from California?
No, I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon. But I lived in California.
You were going to Angeles Temple, right?
Yes, that was in Los Angeles. I lived in L.A. in the 60s and the 70s.
Okay.
And
so how did you actually were you able to take the new, like, a prescription of medications or anything in order to enhance your feminization, or how did that go?
Yes, I did. When I went to Dr. Benjamin, I was on estrogen shots, one estrogen shot a week, and one strong estrogen pill every day, female hormones. The chapter in my autobiography where I discuss that is that the chapter is entitled "A Pill a Day Keeps the Falsies Away." That was something that my friend Laura and I, another trans friend who transitioned at the same time I did, we used to joke about that. But for about 12 years, I was on the female hormones, and they did enhance the breast development, and I still have that today. But with me, I had some emotional side effects from the strong estrogen, where I'd get very moody, and it was Dr. Benjamin said it was similar to women going through menopause. Now, Laura took the same dosage, the same kind of female hormones that I did, and she didn't have that. It's just everybody reacts differently to different kinds of medications,
Well, now they're giving spironolactone as another, drug, and we're finding out that Spiro is not even an androgen blocker, which they stated that it was.
Yeah, very dangerous drugs are being given to trans women nowadays, and we've done a lot of research, and it points that all you really need is the estradiol, but that itself will block the testosterone and will enhance your femininity. So we wanted to ask you never took any of that spironolactone.
I don't know what spironolactone is. I just know I took estrogen. But it not only wasn't just the breast development and all that, but it causes, when you take strong dosages over long periods of time, hip development, and the hair on your head grows stronger, and the hair on your body hair and your legs grows less. It's a complete feminization thing.
Yeah, definitely. Right. I agree. So let me ask you,
also, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
The male sex drive, when a man takes female hormones, it decreases the male, biologically male sex drive. Just like if a female goes on male hormones, what do they call those now? I can't remember. But it's just the opposite. It intenses the sex drive. But when I was on the female hormones, I still had sexual urges, but I wasn't the physical drive, like I'm going to go out and cruise. It was more like an emotional thing. I wanted, an emotional love experience more. But the hormone treatments, when I took them back then, did decrease the male sex drive, and it made the hair on the head, your head grow more, and your arms and legs, the hair there grew less. I don't know if that's still the case today with this new medication or whatever kind you just mentioned or not.
The Spiro is given as an androgen blocker to, decrease hair growth and all that as well, but it also chemically castrates the male, so that their libido drops. And when
I was on the estrogen, my libido did drop, but I don't know if it was any kind of anyway.
Oh yeah, no, but the Spiro actually acts as a real castration, chemical castration, and I was on it because I've been transitioning now for over a year, and when I got off of it, I realized that I've read about it, and I realize that it really isn't doing what doctors are saying that it's supposed to do. I don't know. I think it's the medical community, just being fearful of the effects of estrogen and basically trying to dumb down the amounts of estrogen given. So that you
have to keep in mind, though, it does vary from person to person. Any kind of medication, whether it's hormones or pain pills or whatever, people react differently. For example, with I have back pain, and with Vicodin, a painkiller, it puts me in a good mood. And whereas other people take the same medication, the same dosage of Vicodin, and it makes them sick and it pulls them down. Just the opposite. And so that's probably true in the arena of estrogen and hormones also, I would imagine.
Well, sure.
That different individuals react differently.
Yeah. Sister Paula, let me ask you, how does being transgender align with your spiritual beliefs?
Well, I accepted Christ as my Savior in the Baptist church when I was 12 years old, and I was called to preach the gospel then. And I always knew that I was different. I've been effeminate and had crushes on men as far back, boys, when I was growing up, as far back as I can remember. And I always knew I was different, but I did accept Christ as my Savior. And I knew from that moment until today that God understands me and accepts me. And when I became saved, Jesus became my best friend. And so that is, there are a lot of trans people, though, that grow up in Christian homes where they're taught of course, back when I was saved in 1950, the subject of homosexuality and transsexuality was never mentioned in the churches, and whereas it is now, and there are trans people, that really believe because they're transsexual, if they don't change, they're going to hell and all that. But I've been very blessed. I've always known that Jesus accepts me. Blending my transsexuality and my spiritual relationship with God, for me personally, hasn't been any problem. When I first started living as Paula, I went to the Assembly of God Church as Paula in San Francisco, and I rededicated my life to God as Paula. I felt the inner voice of the Holy Spirit say, "Can I have Paula?" And I knew in that moment that the call that God had given me to preach when I was 12 years old hadn't changed at all, And so that is something that I have been blessed with. I have no trouble blending my spirituality and transsexuality together at all.
Sister Paula, I come from a very similar background. I grew up Pentecostal. I grew up Assemblies of God. I went to a Bible college, Christian school, Christian high school, and everything.
Oh, wonderful.
And
which one did you go to?
I went to Jimmy Swaggart Bible College at the time, back in the 90s. Yeah, so I'm quite
So you're very familiar with. I was saved in a Baptist church, but when I got into high school, I received the baptism of the Holy Spirit at the Assembly of God camp meeting, and I've been Pentecostal and a whole holy roller ever since.
Oh yeah, no, I went to a Spanish-speaking bilingual Assemblies of God church in the Orange County area. Grew up going to, I used to work for Trinity Broadcasting Network. I knew all about, I've heard in every way, shape, and form the message of the gospel. And also, I worked for the Southern Baptist Convention, particularly their production, video and production arm there at the Southern Baptist Convention. So I've been a part of lots of different Christian videos.
Did they know you were transsexual at the time?
Well, when they found out, I was basically given the excommunicating...
The left foot of fellowship.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I was basically non-existent anymore.
When I was at Angelus Temple, the Foursquare Church, I was secretary to a minister and sung in the choir, blah, blah, blah. And I would, if they had found out back then that I was trans, I would have probably gotten booted out too.
But I think that this whole being transgender or dealing with our dual genderness, our dual spirit, is something that basically it transcends, just becoming the other gender. I believe that it is an awakening of what God intended man to be from the very beginning when he created Adam. He created Adam to have both the male and the female inside. So he was basically a superhuman, So I think that what's happened now is that there's been this rush to jump over to one side or the other of the gender spectrum, and nowadays it's easier for men, mostly like in the 40s or 50s and stuff, that are basically disillusioned with themselves, to take this turn into becoming transgender because they feel like they have no other place,
Well, that's understandable because they were told, like I was told when I grew up in the 50s and so on, that girls do this and boys do that, and everything that I innately like to do is what I was told girls do. We're moving away from that now in this generation. The new generation of LGBT youth, they're getting rid of the hormones. I'm sorry, they're getting rid of the pronouns, the he and the she, and moving into to it. And you're absolutely right. You know, everybody has both male and female components. Some people say that the original man was bisexual. That I don't know. It's very possible. Mm-hmm. But, you know, my experience with that is that when I started living as Paula, all of a sudden some of the natural things on my masculine side that I wanted to do, my friends in the trans community says, oh, no, you can't do that because now you're a woman. You do this and you do that. And when I sang in the choir, I sang alto because I was with the women when the voice that God gave me is bass. And so this all came about in, you know, this is in my book. My book concludes when I got into the Congregational United Church of Christ here in in 2006, and I started singing in the choir there. It's a church that's totally open and affirming. You know, I no longer, I came out before then, but no longer did I have to hide anything like I had to hide things when I was in the Four Square Church in the 60s. Now in the United Church of Christ I go to now, I'm totally open, and I sing in the choir in the section with the men, sing bass because that's what my voice is, and yet I'm accepted as Paula. So in other words, the whole thing came full cycle where I'm the whole person, both the male and the female side of me came out. I believe that's the point that you were just making, right?
Yeah, I think that it's not worth, you know, just throwing that out because it is definitely how we were intentionally created by God, you know, those of us who are MTS. And it's something that should be embraced, not something that should be neglected, you know, because all of a sudden trans women everywhere just run over to that really frilly side of being a female, and they become the stereotype of what men expect what men expect women to be. But if you ask a woman what being a woman is about, it's not anything like that. But moving on to the next question, you already started up with, you know, talking about your book a little bit, but can you give us a little bit more detail about the book, Trans Evangelist, The Life and Times of a Transgender Pentecostal Preacher?
Yes, it took me about 7 years to write it, although I took breaks and all of that. And but it starts out, you know, it's broken down into 10 decades. You know, growing up in the 40s, finding God in the 50s, and in each section of the decades there are individual, you know, chapters. And but the decades, growing up in the 40s, finding God in the 50s, cataclysmic changes of the 60s, and you know, when I got into that and the changes that I went through and the cultural changes that happened through the 1960s, it was fascinating, and I have that in the book, and then sins of the 70s and changing priorities of the 80s and the gay 90s, and then new beginnings in a new century, and it goes up. It covers the period from when I was born in 1938 up to 2012, and what it was like, you know, during all those years, and the struggles that I went through, and I tell, you know, I did some stupid things in my life and made some bad choices and some mistakes, and I don't leave those out. Just like with the Bible doesn't leave the sins and the mistakes of people out that it writes about, neither do I. And but anyway, go ahead.
We find
I wound up, but I don't know how to wind down again.
It's okay. It's okay. We find that being transgender is a gift and quite the spiritual experience. What is your
exactly?
Yes.
Exactly, but the book can be ordered through my webpage, which is www.transevangelist. That's one word, you know, Transevangelist, TRANSEVANGELIST.com, and on there's a section Paula's book, and you can order it through the webpage through Amazon, or you can go through PayPal, and I will mail you a personally signed copy. And so I'm putting this out there, you know, if anybody's interested in getting the book. And it's funny because it has some pretty strong stuff in it when it comes to sex and so on and so forth. And it's really funny, you know, I'll never understand human nature anyway as long as I live. People who are very religious and don't even like an off-color or a risque joke, I thought, oh, they're not going to like my book at all. And they loved it.
And this one woman I know, because I also worked, I preached the gospel for 25 years on television as an open transsexual, but I've also worked as an entertainer in the nightclubs, emulating Sophie Tucker, the Red Hot Mama, And I think making people laugh as an entertainer is every bit as spiritual as anything that I would do behind the pulpit.
Excellent, definitely.
And I started to say something else, and it slipped my mind, so we'll move on.
Okay.
I'm 76 years old, so I have my little senior moments.
Bless you. Anyway, what Lena was mentioning earlier, that God created the original man, Adam, being both male and female. I believe
that's right.
That
the rib came from the one account. There's two creation accounts in Genesis, chapter 1, chapter 2. One of them says that Eve was made from the man.
And I believe that originally we were both man and woman in one, and I think that's what's happening now. We're returning to our oneness. It's a spiritual thing that's happening when we're seeing all this amount of transgender people coming out in the world. I think something very spiritual is taking place.
Well, the churches we came from for years put, God as a man, but God is not really a man. God is male and female both and neither.
Exactly.
And we were born in the image and likeness of God. There is the feminine side of God that runs through the scriptures as well as the masculine side of God.
Definitely.
No, I think one of the more important things that we need to understand is that, the biblical account of how things are to be understood have been masked and covered up, and the actual events that have happened, even in the account of creation, aren't necessarily exactly how we think it happened.
I agree.
Yeah.
So what advice do you have for a younger trans generation?
Oh, gee, that's hard to say. They have it a lot of the trans generation of today has it a lot easier than I had when I grew up, as a teenager in some ways. And yet in other ways, when I grew up in the 50s, we didn't have to deal with drugs and things like that like youth are dealing with today. But, the being trans when I was in high school was just totally unheard of, whereas now they have support groups in the schools for gay, lesbian, bi, and trans kids. I have groups documented in my book, that have these outreaches to youth, and we had nothing like that when I grew up at all. So the kids growing up today have it much easier in some ways, and yet they still have a lot of struggles. And I don't know. I really don't give advice in a sense, because I tell my story and I say this is what's worked for me. And so you have to find out what works for you. I'll give you an example. One time, a young man came to me when I was in the secretary at Metropolitan Community Church, and he told me his story, and he says, Sister Paula, do you think I am a transsexual? And I said, I don't know. I said, the answer to that has to come from within you. I don't give advice and tell people whether they're trans or not. They have to come to their own, realization of that, just like I did. But I do share my story and say this is what's, worked for me. And the one thing that the younger generation has picked up on, which I don't like, but yet, is using the word queer as a blanket term to describe all of us. I come from a generation when that word had a stigma, and I just don't like it. But I do point out at the very end of my book that this is how that word is how today's youth express the inclusion of everybody. They see it, and so more power to them. People are free to identify in any way, shape, or that they want to. I personally choose to identify as trans myself. I have a very dear friend who is cisgender. She identifies as cisgender. I still haven't figured out what that means, but that's okay. That's how she identifies. Somebody else may identify as genderqueer, and that's okay too. But for me, I identify as trans. That's the term that when I started living as Paula, like I say, there was just transvestite and transsexual, and transgender came later, and now they have all kinds of different stuff. But my advice is be who you are and use however however you want to identify is fine. And I love, though, the way today's youth are moving away from gender stereotyping. I just love it. When I was in high school, I wanted to take home ec and cooking, and my dad hit the ceiling. And only girls took cooking and home ec in high school then. And he forced me to take mechanics and shop, which I flunked in. But see, that's gender stereotyping that girls do this now. Today we have, we've broken down those gender barriers, which I think is wonderful. We see men who are cooks and chefs. We always have, as far as that goes. And there are some women who are mechanics. And so I'm really happy to see future generations moving away from gender stereotyping, and we are all both male and female. And like the MCC hymn goes, our God is not a woman, our God is not a man, our God is both and neither, our God is I who am. And who you are, is the person that God created you to be, and don't be deceived by religious Bible bigots who are going to tell you that God doesn't accept you, because God does accept you as a trans person, whether you're trans or cisgender or genderqueer, whatever. God does accept you in that role, and don't believe the lie that a lot of the churches put out, against transsexuality.
Well, the reality is that God created spirit. We live this life as either male or female, or however we want to represent ourselves or identify with, but we are eternal spirits.
Definitely.
That's right. That's right, and that's the part of us that will be in heaven someday.
That's right.
And definitely. Well, Sister Paula, thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing your life story. And we were looking forward to this interview, and we wish you lots of luck.
And this goes up on the internet, and I think that it's going to be on my webpage. I think my producer said that. He's going to put it on the webpage. Yes. Yeah, okay. I still haven't figured out all this technical stuff with the computers and stuff. You're young. If I need help on my computer, I go find a teenager.
That's right.
So anyway, thank you for having me on your show. It was I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you. We enjoyed having you. Thank you. Take care.
And remember, transevangelist.com if you want to order my book.
Definitely. You have a page on our web page, and people that click and go directly to your website. So thank you so much.
Well, that's good. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And if there's anything else I can do for you or whatever, or, just you know how to reach me.
Definitely. Take care. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Sister Paula.
Okay, and God bless you.
Take care. Well, the affirmation for today is, I acknowledge my own self-worth. My confidence is soaring. It is important to find self-worth in yourself and allow yourself to go as high up as you can.
Stay tuned for next Monday for current events and the supernatural.
Definitely. We're doing, and also we have a new time. Starting next week, we'll be on at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
9 p.m. Central, Mountain Standard Time.
Yes, so that'll be 8 p.m. Pacific Time.
That's right.
And
7 o'clock in Hawaii, I think.
Yeah, and then 8 o'clock Central Time. And
let's start over. 11 p.m. Eastern.
10 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Mountain, 8 p.m. Pacific.
There you go.
Figured people stay up late, and since our show topics are going to be all over the place, from the supernatural,
all over the map,
yes, to all sorts of new information, the New World Order, conspiracies, all that great stuff we're going to bring to you.
Exactly.
So I'm sure that there's a lot of late-nighters.
But remember, if you can't live your truth,
then it's just not worth living. Good night, everyone.
Good night.